Chapter 44. Human Integration. It appears difficult for us to define the particular form, substance, and direction of activities that we would have to take to secure human survival and thriving in the future development of nature. Our experiences may indicate some tendencies and possible developments of nature that denote a purpose. Notwithstanding, we are left to speculate about its existence, its content, and the conditions by which it might be accomplished. Our position in the evolution of nature may render it indispensable for the continued existence and thriving of humanity that we identify the mission of nature and align ourselves with it or possibly adjust it. Error or indifference may place us in conflict with formidable forces or leave us abandoned. To save our species, we may have to improve our insight into the mission of nature and act upon it. Our inability to securely understand this mission and what it requires of us may leave us insecure, frustrated, and ultimately unsuccessful. To find our way, we must maximize the engagement of our perceptive, emotional, and rational capacities. Moreover, we may be able to depend on the combined context of our needs and our understanding how to best satisfy them as a solid basis to resolve our concerns. A fully developed council of traits appears to be most capable of securely guiding our conduct with regard to ourselves, other humans, and nature in general. Even if we had complete information about all aspects of nature and its development, we would continue to be guided in our behavior by how they can benefit our needs. We would pursue the interests of nature only in as far as this might reflect advantageously on our wishes. As in any other context, our cooperative activities with regard to nature are conducted with selfish motives. We engage in altruistic behavior solely if we perceive a corresponding need. To act in the interest of other humans, other species or types of individuals, or nature in general requires that we receive an adequate return benefit. If we integrate some features of nature into our need for collective survival and thriving, we may support the development of nature to some extent even if such a support negatively affects some of our other concerns. Still, our commitment to nature might never surpass our commitment to ourselves individually or to humanity. If our involvement in the development of nature would harm the fulfillment of our needs for individual or collective human survival and thriving, we might restrain these activities. In addition, if the development of nature without our administration would turn against our individual or collective interests, we would likely take defensive measures against nature. Not knowing what nature's ultimate purpose is and our awareness of nature's uncompromising behavior in the pursuit of its mission may fill us with suspicion that our interests and those of nature may not remain aligned. The record of life indicates that the life forms that once ruled over our realm and many other life forms have vanished as a consequence of challenges by nature. We do not want to share their fate. This infuses us with a defensive attitude toward nature. Observing how nature has dispatched other life forms may settle our attitude toward nature. It may cause us to view it as a cold and merciless force that is prepared to decimate or to discard us if we no longer serve its purposes or another solution serves these purposes better. We may resent nature as a competitive power that insists on utilizing us under disregard for our welfare. We may observe multiple of its aspects with apprehension because these might constitute or develop into threats. Known and feared threats may offset our general emotional identification and utilitarian affection even if we uphold stronger emotional ties to some of its aspects. With such exceptions, we may deem nature to be undeserving of our comprehensive protection or support, let alone our sacrifice. We may limit cooperation to its utility for human survival and thriving. We may qualify our purported function as an agent in its evolution to a scope that is coextensive with our interests. We may only participate in its development to benefit ourselves or to preclude damage to the fulfillment of our needs. In all other circumstances, we may approach nature with offensive and defensive competitiveness. The maximization of our happiness seems to imply that we subject our environment to produce means for our pursuits. Our present utilization of nature may not exhaust its possibilities of service to our needs. To sustain ourselves and thrive, we may have to carefully conceptualize our resource requirements and align nature in accordance. This might not require that we reserve and prepare the entirety of nature for our use. Nevertheless, it seems to require that we gain control of nature in substantial aspects. Securing human survival and thriving further seems to require that we take control of aspects that might interfere with our pursuits. We must secure humanity against competitive acts by nature and obtain benefits against its resistance. This may be necessary even if we were to merely hold our present position. The extinction of species in our system of life seems to have had two types of causes. They succumbed to challenges posed by the development of life or were unable to cope with external events. In either type of challenge, advanced states of technological development might have made a difference. We may therefore concentrate our efforts on it not only for constructive improvements but also to protect our position. Although our control and transformation activities may appear to us like a rebellion against nature, they necessarily constitute developments of nature as well. By threatening us and compelling us to react and by possibly empowering us to render nature conducive, nature may transcend inherent conditions that are adverse to fulfilling its potential. The promise of maximized happiness, and the hazards we must overcome to find this happiness may be a ploy by nature to coax us into its service. Even if we pursue our needs for individual and collective human survival and thriving, we may remain instruments in a greater plan that causes us to manage our environment in the ultimate interest of nature. Our capacity as well as our ambition to pursue our happiness may be program features that enable and compel us to engage in activities that benefit us but also advance nature. By this identity of our and nature's pursuits, we may be both instruments and beneficiaries of nature as long as we follow the demands of our happiness. We may consider such an assessment as overly optimistic. After all, many of the species arising during nature's historical development that became extinct followed the demands of their happiness and still were eradicated. We may doubt that we have more certainty that the human pursuit of happiness is more soundly aligned with nature's development and that such alignment will last. However, we seem to be entitled to some confidence due to the elevated capacities of humans. These capacities seem to enable a merger of our facilities with those of nature. We are a product of nature in all our aspects, including in our genetic and acquired dispositions. We abide by the emotional instructions of our needs that are formed by our mental dispositions and we engage our perceptive and rational capacities in their pursuit. We explore nature and try to comprehend how it works so we can develop manners by which we can employ it to advance the fulfillment of our needs. We internalize nature into a mental reflection of it. Nature defines the implements we discover or create by setting forth substances, their properties, and interactive laws and by positioning these and objects and events cast by them. As we perceive and understand the structures, processes, principles, and allocations of nature, it is molding parts of our mind. It also forms the rest of our body by sustaining it and shaping it through other influences. We then acquire from nature the entirety of our being, including our motivations and our capacity to formulate objectives and manners of how we wish to satisfy our needs as well as our capabilities and instruments for implementation. This may cause us to conclude that nature grows in and into us. Yet we can detect that this motion is joined by a reverse motion. Being a part of nature, we develop nature. Our needs motivate us to synthesize solutions from our observations of nature and examine details under use of mental and more obviously physical facilities we have received. We reflect what we have learned and received from nature into it according to the dictate of our needs. Understanding its workings and using these and their reflections on and in us capacitate us to give shape to nature and to our existence in it. By this application, we turn nature into an extension of ourself. We grow into nature and make it ours. Although we may regard ourselves as separate, this represents an interaction by nature with itself since all our incentives, powers, and instruments we use are part of nature. Still, while we are and remain a part and product of nature, by understanding and using it, we also increasingly become coextensive with it. Mutual interweaving between us and the rest of nature in our development intensifies harmony because nature and we become progressively reflections of each other. In the course of this identification process, our capabilities and motivations and those of nature appear set to become indistinguishable. But our identification with nature may have to remain partial. Ultimately, we seem to have to work with what nature makes available in and to us. We seem to be stringently bound to the elements' properties, and resulting interactive laws that we discover and nature's pre-allocation of substance in our environment. While we may be able to arrange aspects of nature to our liking by allocating its substance, we may not be able to change the fundamental facts and principles from which the world is built. Nature appears to force us to operate with the substance it grants and under the rules that it sets. With the seeming intransigence of its fundamental structures and processes, nature may impose an impediment and ultimately a restraint on what we can achieve. Not all of nature is or may become subject to our will. Rather, nature seems to impose its will in fundamental areas on us. Our contributions in arranging what nature avails to us may be important and perhaps indispensable for its development. Yet, even in that domain, we appear to be restricted to the arrangement of higher orders of correlations. Then again, we cannot be certain that we should not be able to obtain creative or at least modifying control over substances, properties, and higher rules by which nature functions. The boundaries of what humans can understand and control and human assumptions of what they regard as absolute impossibilities have already proved to be incorrect in many respects. We may perceive that there are areas over which nature does not sanction us to assume control. But even nature does not appear to be in command over these matters. It appears to be bound by its components, their properties, resulting interactive laws, and the ways these components formed and allocated. It does not appear to have contemporary power to newly devise fundamental building blocks, their positioning, or their demeanor. The trajectory of the substances, properties, and interactive laws by which nature operates and their allocation might lead to nature's dissipation or reversion in the distant future. Yet, with a sufficient development of its capacities, nature might gain the potential to arrest or reverse such negative processes. Possibly, the mission of nature is ultimately to find ways to influence or escape such or other threats and to continue its existence indefinitely at high levels of development. That seems to be implied in the mission we can currently perceive. But it may be our and similarly situated species' task to formulate that saving feature of nature's mission out of self-interest. It might also be upon us and these other species to formulate, and pursue ulterior purposes. A mere reallocation of substance might be insufficient to achieve lasting survival and thriving or ulterior purposes. Nature might have to transform itself more fundamentally. Through us and other types of entities it may develop, nature may gain that ability. It may attain the power to become aware of its currently programmed fate and to modify it. This may render humanity and similarly capacitated species indispensable instruments in nature's development. Their ability to undertake and employ scientific research combined with their desire to accomplish perfect fulfillment of their needs, including the desire to survive and the insatiable drive to engage in pursuits beyond marks they have reached, seem to make humans and possibly other, similar species suitable and willing candidates to use nature's potential for overcoming its limitations. Notwithstanding, the adequacy of humanity's competence may not be assured. The charge to change the fate of nature might exceed human capacity. Other species might be better equipped to fulfill this charge, and nature might therefore prefer their development over the development of humans. Humans might not even succeed in participating as beneficiaries from the transforming actions by other species. In that event, defensive tendencies and, if these turn out to be hopeless, destructive propensities in humans may set in. A threat of willful destruction also exists if human limitations coincide with limitations of nature's capacity and nothing could be done to change nature's fate of reversion, dissipation, or other detrimental developments. Similarly, we may react with destructive impulses if we should discover that there is no ulterior purpose and that we cannot enforce a purpose of our own selection, or if we should fail to ascertain either of such purposes. We may further react defensively if we know of an ulterior purpose but it is adverse to our interests, and we might in desperation react destructively if we cannot change it. Such reactions may be part of mechanisms that ultimately enable a constructive development of nature, or they may disqualify us as disorders. In either event, we cannot be certain that nature and human interests are or remain aligned. It appears to be upon us as mindful leaders of nature's development to uncover how we fit into it and how we react to our discoveries. Questions about the purpose or consequences of nature's development may not be in the foreground of our mind at lower states of development. Only as we gain power to define us and our world may we increasingly search for answers. As nature reveals its functionalities and as our capabilities to apply them grow, we increasingly have to determine what we will do with our powers. Our assumption of control over nature's arsenal confronts us with a widening and increasingly formidable array of choices. We are challenged to match the resulting availability of means with the wisdom of using them to maximize the fulfillment of our needs. To suitably act and react in relation to nature, we have to learn about its functions and objectives. Its presently perceptible mission and an extension of that mission into a comprehensive transformation to gain awareness of itself may form a valid working hypothesis about the objectives of nature. But this still leaves our positioning regarding these objectives and their possible aftermath undefined. To maximize our happiness, we must gain more clarity in this respect. Yet we may be hesitant to find out about nature and its purposes. There may be a sense of foreboding that we might uncover more of its secrets than is to our benefit. We may fear what we will do if we find out that humanity's future is irretrievably doomed. We may also have a sense that we are not to understand nature's workings and purposes because this would illuminate its origin. The formation of such a forbidding attitude is based on our imagination of an originating entity with fantastic power and intelligent creativity that makes us draw parallels to human qualities because this is the highest capacitated being we know. We may imagine how such an originator would want to be treated by its creation. One demand would seem to be that the creation would not strive to become as powerful as the creator despite its development. Information about how the originator created the world may seem to lead us to match that capability. We may take the difficulty of discovering answers to questions about origin as a signal that these are not for us to find. We may fear that too much knowledge of nature in its current or future stages may present us with such understanding. Moreover, the thought that we might rebel against the plans conceived by the originating force and attempt to change them based on that knowledge might seem to us as a grave affront that might carry punishment. We may hence prefer to shroud issues of origin, functions, and destination whose exploration might afford us monumental powers in diversions of belief that supply us with satisfying explanations while saving us from the alleged threat of too much insight. Even if we do not have such concerns because we do not envision a creative force in anthropological terms, we may maintain similar concerns for reasons closer to our experience. We may fear that we might go too far as we proceed and succeed with our scientific explorations into nature and unleash powers that we do not understand or cannot control. We may fear that we damage or destroy sources of our support and protection in nature. Our fear of advancing into the unknown appears to be reasonable to some extent. Our understanding of the workings and implications of discoveries may be unavoidably incomplete at first, and we may not have the means to control them appropriately. We may also rush into applying newfound knowledge and not possess the maturity to employ it with the necessary circumspection. Short of attempts to apply new knowledge, the act of exploration may already release deleterious forces. On the other hand, we are concerned that without advancing in our exploration and implementation of what is technologically possible, we will fail in our quest for happiness. We may fear that without attaining knowledge of and access to every possible increment of means, we might not be able to fulfill our needs or might not be able to fulfill them as well as we could. We may be particularly plagued by apprehensions about interference. Our fear of an opposing non-human nature and adversities from other humans may induce us to seek all the power we can obtain. We may resolve to be prepared to meet nature's challenges and to preclude anybody, and anything from acquiring a competitive advantage over us. Even if we know or we only suspect that a technology could be used for destructive or competitive purposes, we may want to understand and be able to manage that technology as an offensive or at least as a defensive instrument or to conceive apposite defenses against it. Our fear of new technology is then regularly overcome by the fear of what will happen to us if we do not pursue, apply, or at least reserve application of that technology. Beyond that, we look for comprehensive powers as a general objective. Consummate domination of nature promises the ability to produce or assist ultimate happiness for a large array of needs. As a consequence, all enhancements of our capabilities appear to be desirable, provided that we retain discretion over how to employ them. In spite of possible risks and costs, we may therefore continue to pursue knowledge and technological capacity of any kind to secure all possible bases for advancing and protecting our happiness in any eventuality. Such pursuits may not only expose us to risks in the development and application of potential. They may also divert resources from pursuits in support of our needs. Arguably, this problem might be solved if we could establish production conditions that can conquer scarcity. However, even then, pursuing all possible capabilities nature provides may distract us from understanding and pursuing what makes us happy. It allows these capabilities and their potential to define our wishes. Because our investigations would trace the structures and processes of nature and we would try to gain application power of all its features, nature would dictate our pursuits to be in line with its structures and processes. It provides what there is to discover and determines which of its features we are capable of uncovering and using. By forming our reality according to these discoveries and capacities without our distinction among them, nature would displace our needs. It seems that we may have to transcend the indiscriminate utilization of all capacities nature allows if we want to preserve our ability to pursue our interests. Nature itself may eventually force us to make such decisions because we may not be able to employ all of its potential contemporaneously or in a succession without contradictions. Yet, within the vast remaining array of potentials for our application, we have to still make important decisions on whether and how we apply that potential. Maximizing our happiness appears to require that we organize our technological progress in deliberate ways. Most of the motivation to advance and implement our technology in all possible ways appears to be based on concerns of securing offensive and defensive competitive capacity. Competitive settings also produce or intensify the pressure to gain and apply technological advances without proper knowledge of or in spite of the consequences. Accordingly, we may conclude that we will fare better in our advancement if we can minimize competitive strategies and replace them with cooperative or individual activity. Then again, in these modes of pursuit, we may experience deprivation and fear as well that may prompt similar tendencies of indiscriminate development and of unconsidered haste. This may be most pronounced in earlier stages of human development. Even if we would not have to labor under competitive pressures that are likely to prevail at such stages, conditions of deprivation would be more likely because our abilities to produce means would be lacking. In addition, the relative lack of insight and development decreases human aptitudes to anticipate and counteract damaging implications. Further, humans have not progressed far enough to encounter significant repercussions from scientific discoveries. While that may protect them to a certain extent, it may eventually contribute to the menace of their behavior. Humans may trust scientific methods to be guarantors of progress and security because the knowledge these confer makes the conditions presented by nature more manageable. But they may be too optimistic about the capabilities that scientific methods and future discoveries can bestow and their beneficial character. This unrealistic outlook may not be adjusted in time to avert harm once repercussions loom or begin to occur. Later in human development, negative experiences with purported advancements combined with better knowledge and instrumentation surrounding new insights may have humans take more competent approaches. Yet the severity of disadvantages that might develop from improvident technological advances rises as well. The mounting potential for benefit that our scientific and technological progress carries is paired with growing potential to harm us. The more we can do, the more circumspect we must become in our applications. Our vision, or at least our caution, must continuously exceed our capabilities. Only, our chances of success are in doubt. Humanity does not have a record of proceeding judiciously. As long as our practical capacities outstrip our ability or resolve to make responsible use of these capacities, we risk antagonizing nature instead of channeling it to our benefit. These considerations raise the question how we might exert the necessary control to match our responsibility. For a long time, we will not be able to categorically overcome the underlying problems of our lack of knowledge and ability. Because emerging technologies are situated on the outer edge of what we know and can accomplish, an intrinsic risk remains that we know and can contain none or only part of their possible consequences. The approach toward and the implementation of new technologies therefore always carry an aspect of trial and recklessness. The risk of unforeseen detriment is the price we pay for acquiring beneficial potential. To exclude such risks completely would require the desertion of technological development. However, because we are compelled to generate fresh incidents of happiness and to perfect the satisfaction of our needs, we will not be able to stop our drive toward progress. We can only hope to limit and contain the risks. We may undertake this through carefully controlled settings for scientific research. Beyond that, we have to find ways to better understand the possible ramifications of technological development. We might think of instituting regulations that include sanctioning and supervision by scientific experts to warrant the best possible security for human progress. While this might provide some success, it may be problematic because appointing experts in charge of sanctioning scientific progress might place individuals in control who have a likely non-typical interest in the success or failure of petitioned progress. Alternatively, technological progress would have to be publicly sanctioned in its research and application phases. But the success of such a policy would not be guaranteed. Not all individuals might be capable of adequately understanding and evaluating the substance, risks, costs, and benefits of an unprecedented development. They might be confused, frightened, or unjustifiably encouraged. They might commit errors autonomously, or they might be improperly influenced or misled. As a result, they might be unable to provide competent supervision and guidance. Proficient collective determinations with regard to the advisability of technological developments and applications may require radical changes in education and individual capacity to muster the requisite competence. Even if the sanctioning of scientific development and application could be instituted to function satisfactorily, it seems impossible to suppress the probing or the application of science. In spite of a determination that the search for or application of a technology is not in the overall interest of a society or humanity, dissenting parties might forge ahead. Their fear of scrutiny and prohibition would drive technological progress into secrecy, rendering it more difficult to control its development and consequences. Further, if developers do not have competitive intent already from the beginning, the actuality or threat of rejection and suppression may breed a resolve in them to use their efforts competitively. Such uses may also be the only uses remaining if cooperative uses are prevented. Competitive forces may stand ready to take advantage of societal constrictions of development that drive illicit advancements their way. Even without such pressure, the development and the application of technology are already at risk of being dominated by competitive forces. They are frequently undertaken by a small number of experts. These may be motivated by the ambition to be first in solving a scientific or technological issue, to be recognized, or to produce economic advantages for themselves. These motivations favor already removing the determination whether and how to develop or use technology from the bulk of individuals who are affected by it. Other competitive interests can obtain relatively easy access to this management of technology by tying into and supporting the competitive motivations of individuals who develop or wish to apply technology. Such support may be welcomed by these because of the competitive settings in which scientific progress and results must prove themselves. Moreover, as technology becomes more complex, sponsorship of developments and their application may be necessary in many areas because they may require large investments of resources. Competitive interests may be interested in a sponsorship, because they hope to reserve technological advantages for themselves for purposes of excluding or exploiting others. Where cooperative sponsorship is impossible due to societal disapproval, competitive sponsorship may be the only way to bring a technological development to fruition. But even where a technological development is not inherently against public interest, competitive forces may seek access to reserve and use it for competitive purposes. They may be able and willing to invest more than cooperative interests because past competitive takings empower them and because expectations of competitive takings on account of sponsored advancements make these more valuable to them. Competitive forces may hence be found at the forefront of technological advancement. All these dynamics generate significant risk separately and even more in combination that development and application of technology will be advanced without an effective guardianship in favor of overall benefit. To prevent competitive propensities in connection with technological development and application, it may be necessary that a society or a critical mass of members act in ways that do not allow such tendencies to be rewarded. Cooperative strategies can bring about the necessary fundamental changes in structures and procedures by which technological advancement and implementation achieve validation in many respects. But they might not be able to entirely forestall the development outside and application of technology against the interests of a society or its members. Meeting that threat may force a society or members to undertake any such development themselves and prepare its application or a defense against its threat as well. Only, such countermeasures may be of limited efficacy. Because care is difficult to enforce, we would ultimately have to depend on autonomously responsible behavior to preclude deleterious technological developments and applications. Individual responsibility appears to be particularly indispensable because technologies are typically not inherently deleterious. However, humanity would have to overcome high thresholds of competitive and destructive temptation and of ignorance. It would further have to overcome them uniformly because technologies become more powerful, and even singular applications of them might be devastating. That makes it doubtful that imprudent technological advancements or applications for offensive or defensive purposes can be prevented. This vulnerability adds ultimate urgency to individual and collective reconciliation among humans that bind their interests to one another. It also emphasizes an obligation of general reconciliation to not indirectly undo the demands of individual and collective reconciliation. We might not only have concerns whether humans can develop sufficient discipline to implement protective protocols in the research and application of innovation. We may be concerned as well about the consequences of successful selection and application of technology in furtherance of human needs and about the consequences of boundaries we find or cause for ourselves or others in its application. We may fear that either occasion may elicit destructive mechanisms because it might frustrate some needs. With the ascent of technological abilities, reaching a level of frustration that triggers destructive tendencies does not only seem to become more likely in some respects. The power that technology confers also increases the destructive potential if destructive impulses are triggered. The intentional quality of destructive tendencies may make them more dangerous than other causes with detrimental potential, including intentionally competitive uses of technology. Although competitive interests might use destructive technology, and much of it intentionally, they would use it for the primary objective to secure resources offensively or defensively. They would therefore still give consideration to the preservation of such resources. Destructive propensities upon frustration might be more dangerous because they pursue the destruction of resources as their primary objective, even if they intend to preserve other resources and seek to reconstitute resources after destruction. But these distinctions might often vanish. Destructive mechanisms triggered by frustration during a pursuit or because of perfection are often linked with a competitive state. Competition may activate destructive impulses due to frustration during a pursuit, and as a result of its success. Frustration of pursuits short of perfection and upon arrival may also produce competition that may amalgamate with destructive impulses. Beyond that, competitive conflicts may contain destructive intent from the beginning as a measure to propel pursuits beyond obstructions. Further, destructive acts may be perceived as competitive acts by victims and answered by defensive competition. A competitive defense may largely consist of the destruction of competitive advantages or potential or destruction for retributive purposes. Moreover, in the progress of competitive escalation, the destruction of adversaries or their means may gain an importance that becomes disconnected from objectives to obtain or secure resources as resources, access to them, or uses for them are destroyed. Then again, as potent as competition might be as a cause for destruction, solving these problems through cooperation exposes us to destructive tendencies even more dangerously. By helping us to approach and realize the fulfillment of ulterior needs at secure levels, cooperation activates apparently irresistible desires of destruction due to perfection. Humanity might have some distance to travel before it reaches saturation. There may be considerable technological requirements we still have to realize, natural obstructions to conquer, and mistakes we must avoid and remedy. We may have to overcome competitive attitudes in favor of cooperative organization. Further, we cannot be certain that our capacities and external circumstances will allow the necessary developments. Yet, if we should encounter boundaries and no adequate progress is made to remove or diminish obstacles to fulfillment for any reason, the ensuing frustrations from a lack of advancement may induce destructive tendencies as well. Hence, we seem destined to encounter the threat of destruction upon frustration either by obstruction or success. These phenomena may happen simultaneously because they arise regarding each need and remain largely separate in their motivations. With regard to most if not all our needs, fulfillment appears to be within the range of possibility if humans act responsibly and competently. If humans leave competitive disturbances behind in their development through the reconciliation of their needs, they will concentrate their efforts on finding harmonious solutions to their advancement problems. They will therefore apply destruction only selectively as an unavoidable technical tool to clear obstacles. Destructive impulses may continue to arise due to apparent impossibilities in advancement that foist barriers onto individuals or humanity that these cannot overcome in time. Notwithstanding, they might not give in to destruction out of concern for the damage they might experience. Also, they might be unable to find a destructive direction they could justify as helpful to remedy the causes that trigger destructive impulses. Destructive reactions to perfection appear to pose a much more likely and widespread danger. As we advance in our development and gain insight into our needs and improved capacities to fulfill them, we have to be increasingly concerned about the threat of absolute frustration and inevitability of destructive endeavors to counter that frustration. Even if we would be willing to suffer some pain from destructive activities to leave the pain of frustration behind, we may fear that destructive measures at higher levels of technological development and cooperative integration will not only set our fulfillment levels back but might cause existential interruptions for our pursuits. Becoming aware of such threats might suffice to increase our appreciation of our current status and motivate us against destruction. It may also cause us to intensify our efforts to identify remaining areas for meaningful advancement. If means for all our subordinated ulterior needs have been secured, and we have not succeeded in gathering sufficient motivation to expand our need for collective survival and thriving to a mode that would commit us to advance nature beyond human concerns, we may only obtain relief of advancement from working on our individual and collective survival. Our frustration might be diminished if we perceive a prospect to delay and eventually overcome individual death by natural, intentional, and accidental causes. It might be further decreased if we advance in securing the continued existence of our species contrary to the existential threats we have created or that may independently exist. Considering the supreme importance of individual and collective survival, our preoccupation with efforts of improving and securing it might even allow us to transcend frustrations over the fulfillment of needs that serve that survival. Much of the work into measures to extend individual life and secure collective life and much of the implementation of resulting insights might be carried out by specialists. Yet we might be able and might have to participate in the exploration and application of some insights as well, particularly with regard to the adjustment of our subordinated needs and their manners of pursuit. To the extent our efforts to prolong human life do not only coincidentally apply to others, our motivations are driven by our need for collective survival and thriving. The need to extend individual human life is destined to consolidate with the need for collective survival because individuals will increasingly partake in the future of humanity. Even if individual survival is possible, securing it and the survival of our species may involve extensive work that may preoccupy us for a long time. Individual and collective thriving, although it may be in parts connected to survival, may call for additional efforts. These objectives may grant us room for satisfying advancement during a significant period. Against this framework of constructive possibilities, destructive desperation due to perfection might seem like an irregularity that can be overcome, similar to desperation short of fulfillment, with a proper effort for individual and collective reconciliation. However, unless nature offers unending prospects of human improvement and expansion, we will eventually meet an end to our development. We may encounter it earlier than our perspectives might imply if our capacities or the dispositions of nature do not permit us to move past certain boundaries. At these points, frustration over our incapacitation to extend our reach may join the frustration over advanced fulfillment we may have achieved. This may give rise to a combined paralysis that may render our self-destruction more likely. Preventing these hazards may require the development of our needs beyond concerns of individual and collective human survival and thriving, and the inclusion of other aspects or the entirety of nature. Our apparent task of protecting and supporting the mission of nature might become the saving grace of our existence. But we may doubt whether this path can reward us sufficiently. We might not be able to develop our needs to this scope naturally, and we might not possess the ability to manipulate our needs accordingly. Even if it were technically possible, we might not want to modify our needs in this direction. We might not accept the mission of nature as our mission if it might challenge, curb, or sacrifice our interests in human survival and thriving. We might derive ongoing satisfaction from asserting ourselves against nature's designs and from undertaking to block or change these. But we would also incur the threat and possibly the inescapable reality of becoming disqualified as adversaries of these designs. We may further become disqualified if we strive to avoid self-destruction by modifying our traits to where we would not seek more than human survival and thriving. As long as we can preserve human existence in alignment with nature's apparent strategy, it seems to be prudent that we conduct ourselves in conformance with that strategy. To find out whether and how far we should and can expand our emotional settings to include nature, we have to understand technical issues within ourselves and in nature as well as its mission and how our objectives fit into it. These questions require our exploration if we are to curb the risk of self-destruction and destruction by other forces. We might not escape such a fate even if we undertake appropriate investigations. We might fail because we might be unable to sufficiently understand the mission of nature or our constructive function in it. Even if we found full knowledge and full alignment that would not negatively affect our interests in human survival and thriving, our positioning in relation to the mission of nature beyond our proximate interests might not suffice emotionally. It might not allow us to channel our frustration in the perfection of other needs into the pursuit of that need. Moreover, we might encounter boundaries in our attempts to fulfill nature's mission or when that mission is fulfilled. Hence, risks would continue that we might destroy ourselves out of frustration. We might become victims of our motivational programming regardless of whether we succeed or meet insurmountable boundaries of our capacity or absolute boundaries. The only way to prevent destructive activities against perceived restrictive causes would be conditions in which our involvement with respect to nature's mission would carry on and we would make sufficient progress to keep us satisfied. The immensity of nature's apparent mission appears to give rise to that possibility. A similarly lasting prevention of destructive tendencies might develop if we had to battle nature's intent and were able to hold our position or revise nature. In either event, our mission might be without end. Then again, nature might disqualify us if we fail to adequately advance it for any reason, and even if we succeed if more advanced alternatives are possible. Rather than using the potentially costly and difficult measure of having us dispatched by life forms that can overcome our advanced capabilities, nature may rely on our built-in destructive mechanisms. After all, the destructive mechanisms that we find in the configuration of human pursuits are a result of nature's programming. They might therefore be part of nature's course to meet its purpose if there is a purpose. But humanity must succeed in avoiding the triggering of destructive impulses or change this mechanism for the sake of its own survival and thriving. That pressure has been with us because destructive reactions may occur at any stage of development in which the accrual of happiness in our need for pursuit or other needs is obstructed. Our experience may have been mostly built from destructive impulses in situations short of fulfillment. There, destruction might have some constructive functions in human advancement if it is directed against structures and processes that block further development. Yet the prospect of acting destructively upon reaching our objectives may frighten us as absurd and contrary to all we regularly try to accomplish. The expansion of our need for collective survival and thriving to comprise nature may give us some reprieve from the menace of perfection. But it also renders us vulnerable. We may be insecure about nature's mission and thus commit error in our support and protection activities on its behalf. More than that, we may fear that these activities may be ultimately frustrated or reach perfection as well, causing a final frustration that we cannot overcome. While expansion of our need for collective survival and thriving may be humanity's only hope to prevent destruction, we might hesitate to find out more about nature's mission. We might fear we might not be able to cope with insights of ultimate limitations even if we are far from reaching them. We might fear the specter of a senseless and doomed existence, of monumental struggle and unavoidable failure, or of success without any chance of recourse. Only, we might be much more concerned about failing in our pursuits and finality than running out of options for pursuit upon perfection. These fears already burden us with regard to our individual existence. Our hope that our kind will survive and will continue pursuits we leave incomplete can substantially soothe our desperation over our own death and failure. Yet, if we were to know that humanity will not survive or succeed either, our pain might become overwhelming. The only way we might be able to exist without our destructive mechanism taking over in the face of the inevitability of individual death and the possibility of collective death is to avert our eyes, to not probe deeper into the fate of humanity, and to seek emotional distractions. A more remote fear of perfection may push us increasingly in the same direction as we begin to understand the agony and the destructive threat of perfection. Distracting notions may shield us during periods when our knowledge is low enough to provide us with sufficient room for imaginations that sustain our denial of a possibly tragic reality. We may attempt to delay deeper insights about nature as long as we can. However, these subterfuges unescapably fall apart as our scientific knowledge progresses and the raw nerve of our ultimate fear is laid bare by the undeniable contrast of reality to our wishful beliefs. Our exposure to this fear appears unavoidable because the relentless urgings by our need for pursuit and unfulfilled ulterior needs push us to reveal what nature has in store for us. Thus, two contradictory forces seem to be at work in humanity. Both might want to explore opportunities. But one goes further and also explores prospective adversities to see what can be done to overcome them. The other force refutes such explorations and seeks to deny insights for fear that prospective reality might cause us unredeemable fear and that such fear might trigger impulses in us to act destructively and thereby cause us even more anguish. Such concerns are valid. We may prevent their materialization by modifying our destructive impulses and the outlook of our traits. If there is a chance that we might overcome adversities, we may let the pain of that adversity motivate us to change our circumstances to arrange for an improved existence. But if nature carries adversities that we cannot possibly overcome, whatever we might do or how we might develop, or if we achieve a stage where we have conquered all possible adversities and achieved perfection, there is no reason we should suffer pain and the danger of our destructive reactions from such conditions. The only way to prevent continuing pain and to diffuse our destructive inclinations upon meeting absolute barriers seems to be the modification of our motivations. Our need for pursuit would have to become coextensive with our ulterior needs. Our ulterior needs would have to be curbed to what can be accomplished, and their satisfaction would have to be rendered coextensive with fulfillment. If such a curtailment were exerted in error, it might foreclose us from remaining at the forefront of nature's development and result in decidedly negative consequences due to our self-authored eventual inferiority and irrelevance in comparison with other species. But such inferiority and irrelevance might happen anyway if we encounter barriers during our pursuits that we cannot possibly surmount, or if we achieve perfection for our needs while other species are not affected by such restraints. They might have skills or needs we might not be able to develop. Although our limitations may decide our fate, our destructive tendencies might only add to our detriment. We will have to live and arrange ourselves with circumstances that we cannot alter to maximize our survival and thriving. Notwithstanding, it might be unwise to resign to any kind of perceived fate. A determination that humanity has extended to a limit that it will never be able to transcend may require a degree of certainty that we might never possess. While we might prepare for adjusting our needs in case we meet an absolute limit, we must follow them, including our motivations for pursuit, until we encounter such a limit. Rather than decreasing our needs, we might try to rein our destructive inclinations in through genetic manipulations, modifying or attenuating layers of acquired traits, or external restraint. We may regard our destructive mechanisms as mistakes that we must correct to secure our continued survival and thriving. Then again, from the viewpoint of nature and the course of its development, such mechanisms may carry a vital function of systemic protection. Humanity's destructive mechanisms may represent a challenge to humanity that it must overcome by solving the causes for destructive impulses to become instrumental in the pursuit of nature's mission. Humanity may be programmed to self-destroy if it encounters insurmountable obstacles in the development of itself or of nature, because humanity might have failed or fulfilled its task to capacity, and nature must build or admit alternative developments to sustain its mission. Moreover, destructive impulses in reaction to misdevelopments or lack of progress that occur despite the availability of more constructive alternatives may confine and neutralize deviations from and hindrances of nature's mission before these become too extensive. In either event, the setback of destruction may grant our species a chance for new beginnings and improved performance. But if the gravity of our incapacity or error is too great, it may prevent a recovery and allow other species to take over. If humanity can develop far enough, it might be charged to dilapidate or destroy a perfect state of nature to cause its renewal in a repetitive cycle or to give rise to another purpose. Yet, unless the extent of our capacities and their exercise is coextensive with the advancement potential of nature, it is likely to grow other leading species for its advancement that surpass us. Self-destruction mechanisms are effective in facilitating a change of leadership because they remove an inept species and leave room for a more competent species to fill its place. They are also efficient because they avoid a struggle between contending leaders, and the possible destruction of a species with better potential. Destructive mechanisms then appear to represent built-in routines of nature that prevent, restrain, or eliminate us from seriously damaging its development. They appear to be safety devices that react to our failure to assume or to continue our seemingly designated function in the advancement of nature. If we fail to make adequate progress in nature's development, including in our own development as its instrument for subsequent use, we may incur damage or even our destruction. These devices appear to be part of a general principle according to which nature supersedes aspects of it that are or come to be in disharmony with its mission or leave potentials for perfection that these aspects cannot or do not fill. There may be many events in nature that do not take place according to this principle, and promising developments may be cut short without any justification in relation to it. But such events seem to constitute unfortunate accidents that do not destroy the general application of this principle. Normally, nature may undertake the replacement of a species by having it die out for lack of adaptation or by having better adapted life forms claim the resources of less adapted species or place direct existential pressure on them. The destructive mode of lacking adaptation may apply to humanity as well. It may be progressively less provoked by independent environmental modifications because humans may learn to adjust to such altered circumstances through technology. However, the development of adaptive technology may not keep pace with the changes humanity inflicts on its non-human environment, and itself by imprudent population and technological development. It may fail to adapt to changes it causes and thereby prompt existential challenges to itself. This may be counted as another self-destructive mechanism that may liberate nature of leading species that disregard its mission or their responsibility for that mission or that prove themselves incompetent in attempts at its advancement. This mechanism shows similarities to other purging phenomena in nature where presumably successful species proliferate and ravage their resources to a point where their population collapses. But most of those incidents differ in their depth of damage. They may merely regulate the presence of a species into harmony with a relatively rapidly convalescing system of life. Human capabilities, in contrast, may cause such profound damage to a system that they may severely set back the supportability of life. This may not permit any remnants of humanity to participate in a recovery of life or may cause remaining humans to suffer from previous transgressions for protracted periods. The extent of a collapse and the difficulty of surviving and recovering from it may be particularly high because humans may have heavily relied on specialized and cooperative undertakings for their pursuits before the collapse. That dependence may have enabled initially particularized problems to evolve in breadth and severity. Moreover, the connectedness and spread of humankind may have caused the same types of problems to arise systemically. The pervasiveness of deviations from harmony with nature and the systemic radiation of problems may paralyze and extinguish a highly integrated human civilization, leaving its former resources largely unavailable for escape or remediation. We may then conclude that the progression of nature through adaptive challenges is well intact with respect to humanity. Although humanity may severely damage the system by deviations from natural cycles, its relatively elevated susceptibility to succumb to environmental damage compared to other species may leave such other species in existence. These may be able to recover and spawn a new sequence of development. Intentional destruction in response to the frustration of advancement may have similarly and even more severe consequences for a system of life. Yet, even here, it may not be destroyed in its entire array of life and offer sufficient resilience to reform and advance again. Intentional destruction may be the only other way for nature to rid itself of an inept leading species because the traditional ways by which better adapted species can rise and claim the resources of less adapted species or can exert direct existential pressure on them, are likely to be successfully suppressed by leading species. The rules that allow the replacement of species at lower levels of development may not apply in an environment where a species has reached the power and intent to manage the development of all other species and keep them at a distance from its level of development. Such a domineering species is unlikely to allow the development of other species to rival it, and negatively affect its survival and thriving. It might be unwilling to share its assumed prerogative to shape and use nature to its advantage, even if it shall include protection and support of nature into its needs. Humanity is an example of such a leading species. It appears to be determined to defend its domination of its realm against any rival. Its dominance over its system might provide humanity with repeated chances upon events of self-destruction to change direction in its development, to become more competent in ways that do not cause it to engage in self-destruction, and to instead develop in accordance with nature's mission. humanity might be able to recover and to take on its responsibility with the lessons learned from previous mistakes or with better evolution. But it also might not change its dispositions, particularly if it sets itself back to where little or no memory or indication of former mistakes or failed advancements remains. Even with sufficient recall and evidence to be aware of previous causes for destruction and their consequences, it might not succeed in modifying its dispositions in time to escape repetitions of the same faults. Its high degree of aptitude may not provide a sufficient period for evolution to occur before it is challenged again by similar problems, or its evolution may be repetitive and not allow beneficial variations. These factors may commit humanity to recurring cycles of advancement and destruction without ever reforming itself and without eliminating itself or setting itself sufficiently back to allow a new beginning by another species from within the system. It might continue to inflict incapacitating damage on burgeoning species with higher development potential in spite of its periodically reduced numbers and means. If we should succeed destroying ourselves, our destructive activities might destroy any potential for an alternative development to us in the realm we control by rendering it unfit for life, or at least the development of higher life. We might even gain adequate control of self-destructive mechanisms without aligning ourselves with the purposes of nature, thus remaining in power of our system with unmitigated presence. We might then export our destructive or unproductive habits by founding new systems of life elsewhere or by invading other systems of life and establishing our domination. In such situations, nature might be moved to intervene externally. One might argue that it is incorrect to assume that nature possesses a plan, an intent to advance it, or the capacity to react to misalignments. Nature's design and its pursuit of it may not be homogeneous. But we can discern an overall progression that reflects a high degree of organizational and managerial talent that prompts us to speak of nature, its mission, and its actions as if it were an entity that mindfully implements its plan and reacts to misalignments. Such references are more than manners of speech because nature produces agents that can perceive, consider, decide, and act on its behalf. The development of nature through multiple so-qualified species is likely because of the likelihood of conducive conditions elsewhere. Systems of life may occur in relatively close vicinity, including in the same planetary system. They may amalgamate relatively early, or they may exist harmoniously due to different environmental conditions in planetary systems, under the leadership of one species that asserts domination. They may therefore qualify as one system. But this might leave innumerable possible other systems that are further apart. Even if there were originally only one origin of life, its dissemination and development in dispersed systems would in time result in a multiplicity of systems that may go separate ways and not interact for a long time. As leading species in originally developing and in seeded systems understand nature's mission, they may seek to advance the mission in other parts where it is not or not appositely established. Such species may administer developments of nature that are destined to win according to its progression against those destined to lose. This may involve competition and destruction. Still, the participation by advanced leading species from multiple systems may render the process in which the direction of nature sorts itself out similar to individual and collective reconciliation processes for the achievement of a greater good for constructive participants. Beyond reactions to concerns about how the internal affairs of a system affect nature, there may be occasions for interventions among systems that stem from the expansion by leading species or their surrogates beyond the traditional boundaries of their systems. Humanity may invite both types of intervention. Its competitive and destructive inclinations cause concern about its tutelage and advancement of nature within its system. Further, our hostility toward species that are or could become powerful enough to place our domination in question may not halt at species within our system. It would seem to also apply to species from other systems. Our determination to continue our position at the top to secure the survival and thriving of our species may not even stop if we should encounter superior species. These proclivities make humanity dangerous for itself, its system, advanced species of other systems of life, and these systems. This may prompt alien advanced species to become involved in controlling the danger posed by humanity. They might subdue humanity's development or quarantine, engineer, or eliminate it to defend themselves and their systems or in assistance of nature's mission in humanity's and other systems. Then again, leading species of other systems may not only act defensively. They might exhibit offensive competitive attitudes similar to those assumed by humans toward their own and other systems, and particularly toward actual or potential co-competitors. The competitive selection of us by nature for its advancement in our system may have us suspect that it might retain this principle in its advancement when different systems meet. It seems prudent to presume that leading species in other systems arrived at their positions by similar competitive means and would therefore hold similar attitudes. The rise of a species to the top of all other species signifies a competitive triumph over all contending species. Even if such a rise may be in many respects served by cooperation with other species, its success is ultimately founded on the ability of a species to impose its pursuits on its environment. Once the supremacy of a leading species over a system has been secured, it may have more latitude and gain more capacity to organize its conditions cooperatively. Further, securing its existence, advancement, and proliferation may require it to reshape or embed much of its competitive demeanor into cooperative relationships to enhance the effectiveness and efficiency of its pursuits. Yet broad cooperation may only be a tactic to grant intermittent relief to resources that a leading species continues to exploit. Cooperation toward nature beyond its own species may be principally governed by proximate utilitarian attraction. It may not willingly suffer detriments in its relationship with nature unless these would yield greater benefits for its proximate needs. We may hope that a cooperative relationship with similarly or more enabled species from other systems might provide such benefits. But leading species may not have much motivation to cooperate with leading species of other systems to fulfill their proximate needs. They may already have all technology and processing resources they desire. They may merely lack resources that are unavailable because they are claimed or used by another system. The leading species of that system may be unwilling to share these resources, or the portion it may agree to share may not be sufficient to satisfy the needs of the other leading species. Such circumstances may make competitive interaction a preferred or, if a resource could not be obtained otherwise, the only feasible course to sustain a system that lacks a resource. Such exigencies would seem to be rare considering the availability of resources in uninhabited locations and the technological aptitude of species that can affect other systems. Yet, even if cooperation is possible, it depends on participants' rational, emotional, and practical capacities and dispositions, the fulfillment status of their needs, the resources they lack and can offer, and coincidental factors that may render the prospects of a cooperative interaction hard to predict. Even if a cooperative relationship can be established, the underdevelopment of constructive aspects may cause it to take the form of a resentful and fearful compromise to avoid conflict in ranges where the pursuits of leading species intersect. Regardless of any ostensible cooperation, the positioning in such a relationship may continue to be determined by competitive criteria. The interaction of leading species from different systems might be compared to the interaction of different tribes or societies on Earth. While this may evoke notions of horrific competitive struggle, we may also derive moderate encouragement from this analogy because of the demonstrated ability of humans to overcome the threat of such struggle and to peacefully coexist and cooperate for a common good. But if humans do not need one another for proximate pursuits, coordination among them would have to be based on empathy and the mutual inclusion in their need for collective survival and thriving. These criteria might be missing or be weaker in our relationship with leading species from other systems. There may be commonalities associated with the similarity of leading species positions and advancement, and even an acknowledgement of a mission of nature. Still, negative tribal impulses that are enhanced by separate development, leading species claim to dominance, and their fear for their dominance and existence may prevail. In the absence of emotional bonds, differences of interest may pit leading species against one another. in determining who manages the progress of nature, no mercy may be granted to the losing species. These possibilities and unpredictabilities may strengthen competitive instincts in leading species and may inspire them not to take chances. Similarly matched species might enter into agreements that permit them to explore true cooperation. Yet they might also seek out alliances and other advantages that reinforce their competitive power. They might further direct their competitive ambitions toward less advanced or otherwise weaker systems. That other leading species might act in such ways may not bode well for the advancement of humanity if it should be surrounded by more advanced systems. Competitive assertiveness and scheming, readying humanity for battle to deter or become a valuable ally, and possibly fighting with other leading species may be the only way to secure its survival and thriving. The existential import of an intersystem encounter requires that we prepare ourselves for the eventuality that it might be antagonistic. To deter competitive action against humanity, we would have to be able to expose attackers to a threat of damage that makes vanquishing humanity uncertain or at least calculably unattractive. But we may not be able to build effective deterrence against powers that are significantly higher developed. Moreover, assembling credible defenses may induce conflict even with well-intentioned species if our defensive potential could also be used offensively. This threat may move alien forces to preemptively destroy our capacity. The potential for devastation from conflict with similarly or more advanced civilizations makes developing our violent potential a dangerous strategy to secure our survival and thriving. Nevertheless, we may be unwilling to leave ourselves defenseless because our defeat by a competitive species threatens to have gravely negative, and possibly existential consequences for us. We may be willing to risk our existence to defend it against such a threat rather than surrendering to a similar fate without a fight. Because attacks on us might occur without warning, our preparedness and our alert levels would have to be high. Notwithstanding, we might prevent misunderstandings regarding our intent and attacks from other systems out of fear if we prepare and set forth convincing modes of cooperation for the event that counterparts from other systems are willing to respect the integrity of our system. While we might then take precautions to allay the fear of other leading species, we may encounter more difficulties relieving our own fear. We have no idea whether alien leading species would understand our position or respond to us in kind if they understood our position. As we become aware of possible risks of encounters with leading species from other systems, we might be detained in a continuous state of uneasy anticipation. We might recoil at the thought of how vulnerable we could be to competitive infringements by advanced life forms from other systems. But we may have some reason to hope that our fears of a competitive environment beyond our system are unfounded. Based on our growing comprehension of the superiority of cooperation over competition, we may have general confidence that nature advances in that direction. There are also more particular grounds to consider that nature might change its procedures in determining its advancement at higher levels. Competitive ambitions seem likely to be absent in species that have achieved high levels of development. They appear likely to recognize that their needs are better attended by cooperating based on several factors besides deterrence. One cause might be their understanding of nature's mission and the constructive function other systems have in advancing it. This insight might be related to emotional identification based on observations of similarity. Securing and maintaining a high level of development, and the incorporation of the potential of nature into technologies may cause highly developed species to increasingly resemble one another. By the time species have developed sufficiently to affect one another, the templates available according to the provisions of nature for such a position of progression may have shaped them to great similarity. Resulting empathy and inclusion into their need for collective survival and thriving might forbid them to engage in hostile activity. Moreover, such species would have had to already exercise comprehensive cooperation among their individuals to reach a highly developed state and would have had to overcome competitive and destructive proclivities to succeed. Given the increasing similarity and cooperative orientation of highly developed species, they might connect to one another as they would connect within their species. They might also identify other subjects where they can benefit from constructive cooperation in exchanges or in joint undertakings. Attitudes of superior species might change if the developmental distance between species is too great to imply deterrence, recognition of similarity, or practicality of cooperation. Still, even then, advanced species might recognize a potential of less developed species to attain similar levels. They might meet species that carry such developmental potential with the same respect as similarly advanced species and protect and support the development of nascent species. Competitiveness and destructive tendencies by leading species in earlier periods of development might be excused as an unavoidable transitional aftermath of primitive conditioning. But this indulgence may be conditioned upon the capacity of species to advance past these attitudes. It may also depend on the feasibility of containing their disturbance potential for other systems and for their or their systems' development. Humanity might already be or come under such scrutiny in its development. While it might appear far-fetched that we would give consideration to how we should interact with other systems and that we would currently act upon such considerations, such precautions appear to be existentially important. We may encounter representatives from other systems as we venture farther into space. Species from other systems may make contact with our system at any time, or we may realize that such species have already made contact, are still present, or might return. If there are other systems of life and if these systems bring forth developments of species with advanced capabilities, it seems to be only a matter of time until we are confronted by contact with them. If we are the initiators of such contact, we might have considerable time to determine our stance and to study other systems before we make contact. Even if we come upon representatives of other systems or other systems during our expansion, we may have had some time to develop protocols as to how we should act based on general thoughts or observations. But contact might be completely unpredictable for us if it should be initiated from other systems of life. Alien species might possess an advantage if they observed us before they made or permitted contact. Then again, this also means that it might be possible for us to influence their attitudes and actions toward us by demonstrated conduct before contact. That may be important because they may predict how we will react to actual contact and will have taken that predicted comportment into account in their approach toward us. Our reaction to both potential and actual contact might therefore be of existential importance for the survival and thriving of humanity and our system. This prospect may have us worried. While we may be optimistic that species capable of making contact with us will have advanced to cooperative attitudes, we may realize that we may not offer much assurance by our past and present behavior that we would consistently reciprocate and might thereby jeopardize ourselves. We may still hope that the generosity by superior aliens will inspire us to mature and act more like them. We may hope they will forgive our competitive shortcomings and lapses. We may wish they would guide or compel us to act cooperatively, even that they might transform our personalities to become cooperative. We may wish that they would endow us to find better and possibly perfect fulfillment of our needs through the provision of resources, intervention, instruction, or removal of us to their world. Similar imaginings already form parts of beliefs and desires for our treatment by an originating force. This may motivate us to identify technologically superior leading species from other systems as that originating force or its agents. Further assimilation of our beliefs may be caused if we accept that such species created us or our system. The resulting godlike position that we might impute to leading species from other systems may cause our veneration for such beings to merge with our religious beliefs. But our faith that we deserve such treatment is fundamentally shaken by our competitive and destructive propensities that cause pervasive failure by us to live up to cooperative insights. We recognize that our cooperation may be insincere or insufficient. We know that we would have difficulties emotionally identifying with another leading species. Our cooperative attitude would predominantly spring from our technical inferiority that would not allow us to win in a competitive confrontation and our fear of being subjected to competition or destruction. It would also be fueled by our expectation to benefit over proportionally from more advanced technologies or other resources. It is uncertain whether we would have much to offer in the return of resources or the advancement of nature's mission that might render cooperation with us worthwhile for more advanced species, at least until our competitive and destructive proclivities have receded. They might try to manipulate our mental traits to accomplish this transformation. However, in the absence of benefits to them, they might have to base their cooperation with us principally or entirely on empathy and the inclusion of humanity into their need for collective survival and thriving. They may resign to the fact that we cannot reciprocate in full mutuality. Nevertheless, their indulgence might wear thin if we were to take advantage of them without having a chance for improvement, or if we otherwise posed a threat or potential threat to them or their interests. Sponsoring us because of our potential in the progression of nature might not present a sufficiently compelling reason if this potential can be convincingly shown to be absent, weak, or inconsequential, and therefore not warranting the subjection of nature or features of it to the danger we pose. Their emotional identification based on their need for collective survival and thriving might dissolve, and remaining empathy might be neutralized by the pain we cause. Considering our experiences of what can occur when we answer cooperative approaches with competition and destruction among humans, we might fear the internal and external consequences of our apparently inevitable betrayal of cooperation afforded to us by advanced species from other systems. Beyond that, such species might be aware of our failings through prior observation and withhold protection and support. They might further practice defensive strategies against us on behalf of our human or non-human environment that we jeopardize or impair by our competitive and destructive approaches. Our inadequacy causes us to fear contact with cooperatively minded aliens. We may dread their disdain and wrath as much as, if not more than, the hostile intent from offensively competitive species because we understand it to be justified. We might even be less concerned about offensively oriented aliens because their nature is more familiar to us than cooperative perfection. Based on our competitive characteristics, we may perceive a better chance that we can arrange ourselves with such species or meet them on such terms and prevail. We might even wish that cooperatively minded species would show offensive competitive failings, so that we could overcome our impressions of emotional inferiority to them, and render them more lenient toward our transgressions. Containing our competitive impulses in light of the cooperative example set by superior species might be difficult because cooperation with superior species might not only impart us with appreciation, admiration, and other incentives for emotional attachment. It would also instill awareness in us that we are not the leading species anymore. We further would realize that we cannot behave any more as we please because we depend on the resources and countenance of a higher authority and are subject to its scrutiny. Our emotional attachment toward superior species may therefore have to contend with competitive and destructive impulses. We may exhibit our worst attributes in reaction to a demonstration of the best qualities by our benefactors. Even if alien leading species took pains not to impose on us and attempted to meet us in peaceable coexistence and possibly constructive cooperation, we might apprehend that exercising our accustomed freedom to exercise competitive domination may result in severe defensive repercussions. Thus, our cooperation might not be so much founded on insight than on necessity. It might be additionally motivated by our ambitions to acquire and delete alien technological advantages, find their weaknesses, and use these for competitive leverage. This prospect may form a strong disincentive for cooperation by such species with us. All these considerations of how we and leading species of other systems might interact may have us anticipate inter-system encounters with great anxiety. To mask this anxiety and to validate our supremacy, we may raise mental barriers of denial that such encounters could occur. Even more, we may try to dismiss the possibility that such encounters have already occurred, that we might be a product of seeding or other developmental manipulation, or that we might presently suffer interference or face its recurrence. Although we might be tempted to envision such an interference as potentially beneficial, we may also fear the opposite based on our suspected or actual inadequacy. Either way, we may have concerns about the possibility that we are or will be sharing the world with other leading species. If we depend in our concepts of pursuit on an understanding of the world that might be imperiled by such revelations, we would have to undergo a reorientation. Such a challenge might cause us internal and external upheaval if it is thrust upon us without adequate preparation. Concerns about changing paradigms may particularly befall ruling competitors, their beneficiaries, and their agents. They have reason for fear because beliefs, attitudes, and organizational premises on which their standing and pursuits are based are likely to be questioned, revised, or dissolved. They are hence likely to suppress considerations of past, present, and future contact as well as reactions to them, or may try to manipulate these to support their dominance. They may try to foreclose contact or to take advantage of it to safeguard their position. Upon encountering superior competitive species, they might offer to act as subordinated agents for them. Alien competitors might welcome this because it would limit the breadth and potential problems of their involvement while permitting them to employ and operate under the cover of their competitive subordinates. Even cooperatively oriented aliens may use competitive rulers because this may avoid competitive enmity by ruling competitors and permit practical contact under the prevention of turmoil. To the extent alien presence becomes public, aliens might tie into religious concepts as ready instruments to maintain and possibly subordinate and shape social order. Aligned ruling competitors might institute or assist such notions because they allow them to conceal the nature of their relationship and to achieve competitive benefits through an accepted position of rightful appointment, and of divine delegation. Yet such justifications might not comply with alien intentions and are bound to fail as humanity develops. This might lead to an understanding to keep the fact and circumstances of alien presence secret. By working with and by proceeding through competitive rulers, cooperatively oriented aliens would turn into competitive rulers, even if they entertained such tactics for cooperative purposes. They would exclude ultimate subjects from knowledge of their presence and objectives and from reacting thereto, and they would reinforce the exploitation of victims. Aliens might also exert direct competition. They might maintain secrecy that renders even competitive rulers unaware or unclear about their presence and objectives. Otherwise, they might dispense with all disguises and openly interact with humans in disregard of their will. Such conduct may be justifiable as defensive competition if it is necessary to foreclose misguided competitive or destructive activities by humans toward one another, their system, or their more extended surroundings, or if they are geared to otherwise assist humans in ways that these cannot adequately fathom. However, they would be unjustifiable if they were founded upon an offensive motivation. The prospect of being subjected to an alien agenda without our consent or even knowledge and without possessing the capacity or information to judge the existence, nature, or purpose of such intervention may intensify our anxiety. Even if we eliminated competitive human rule and religious manipulation, our view of whether we are being subjected to such an agenda, and our capacity and ability to judge its merit may not be clearer. We may simply not be at a stage of mental development where we can adequately understand whether we are being helped or damaged. Nor may we be able to do much even if we had that understanding. But our contacts might not be of such mysterious kinds. They might move within parameters in which we are well aware of their justification. In these aspects, shedding competitive and religious buffers to our awareness and ability to act may be vital. Our anxiety about contact with other systems of life may not be limited to encounters with leading species. Subordinated species may join in an encounter or make contact by intent of leading species or by coincidence of their activities long before leading representatives meet or without them ever meeting. The activities of leading entities to explore space, obtain resources, or proliferate life through subordinated agents may interfere with other systems. Even if the leadership of systems pursues cooperative arrangements with other systems, other entities from their systems may act competitively. They may exclude or exploit by their nature or by design. They may not be programmed or directed to cease such activities if they interfere with other systems of life. Even the introduction of life forms that exist in an ecological balance in their own system into another system, may interrupt that system's established cycles. because of the interdependence of life within a system, specific disturbances may jeopardize larger aspects. To avoid such competitive consequences, leaders of systems would have to securely manage system encounters on all levels. They may have to proceed with extreme circumspection in their expansive activities generally, and particularly in their seeding of other worlds on their own behalf or in a perceived more extensive mission. They might undertake this not only because of their dedication to the development of nature but also for fear that interference in other systems might be answered defensively. The threat that systems of life might damage one another grows as they interact more intensely. In spite of the best motivations, an involvement between systems of life past a certain mark may cause the more resilient system to emerge as dominant and to supersede the weaker system. There is also a risk that all participating systems might be damaged, possibly beyond repair. Leading species may thus decide to forego contact with other systems of life and to discourage and ward off approaches from other systems. They may further limit the expansion of their system to areas that do not carry a risk of contact, or they may test the presence of other life forms. If their expansionary efforts meet with other systems of life, they may retreat or circumvent them. If contact cannot be avoided, they might resort to radical methods to protect their system. They might quarantine, decontaminate, or purge aspects of their system that have come in contact with alien life. They might also determine that surviving involvements among systems unscathed calls for the elimination of approaches by life forms from other systems and possibly of life in other systems before it can spread to contaminate their system. They may prosecute such a radical strategy aggressively without careful maneuvering to avoid other systems. Arguably, such strategies would be in disregard of life's mission. But if the choice were to save one system of life or none, defensive selection would serve nature's purpose as the best solution. Beyond that, offensive competition among systems might generally seem in the interest of nature. Merciless annihilation of weaker systems might seem to be part of a technique we observe to be predominant in our system, that appears to serve nature well. Nature might be set to incur the risk that systems might be damaged or destroyed in competition with one another to derive and advance a result that proves most successful and therefore most capable of advancing nature. Yet, applied to the interaction among systems, a competitive strategy might cease to serve this mission and instead damage and even fundamentally endanger it. The potential of mutual devastation among developed systems may render competitive strategies counterproductive. Even if a system is so superior that it can be victorious without incurring repercussions, the neutralization of systems would not necessarily serve the apparent objective of nature to transform its non-living aspects into living aspects and ultimately awareness. It would only expand the habitat for some living entities at the expense of others. This might generate a broader basis for a system with superior capacity to serve nature's mission and enable a subsequently superior transformation of other aspects of nature. However, by destroying another system, a victorious system does not necessarily prove itself as more able or willing to pursue nature's mission. It may act severely competitively by using neutralized systems as temporary resources and moving on to further systems upon their exhaustion. Even if a competitive system was strictly devoted to the advancement of nature, a system that is eliminated might have carried a potential to advance nature more than the victorious system, or to develop capabilities that could have complemented the capacities of other systems. Even if the potential of a victorious system to advance nature should be superior, these advantages may not compensate for the interference with the mission that extinguishing systems of life causes. Particularly, considering that immense expanses of nature remain untouched by life, any annihilation of contributors to its mission and any investment of resources into their annihilation appear counterproductive. A takeover of a system only seems to be constructive if a location has conclusively demonstrated its inability to bring forth entities that can advance nature's mission. Yet any presence of life appears to disprove that disability. If a setting carries life, other systems would have to abstain from interfering, except possibly to protect and support the advancement of that indigenous life, remedy its developmental flaws, or protect other systems from deleterious interference by such life. Nature may not be able to rely on leading species of systems to behave in accordance with this directive as long as they have not fully reconciled with nature and adjusted their motivations to comply with its mission. To flourish in its development, nature might have to avoid contact among systems of life while their leading species are still motivated by competitive programming, or are still incapable or unwilling to interdict competitive demeanor of other inhabitants of their system toward other systems. Here again, nature's development appears to be substantially protected by the destructive mechanisms that engage in consequence of competitive mistreatment within leading species or by leading species of their environment, and the destructive mechanisms that engage due to frustrations when cooperative concepts are insufficiently developed. These mechanisms may preclude technological development to a level that is necessary for intersystem travel past planetary distances, or they might delay the arrival of intersystem journeys sufficiently to enable countermeasures. Transcending that barrier may be predicated upon a comprehensive cooperative transformation. This may be a security device that disqualifies systems from interacting until leading life forms have appropriately arranged themselves and their system. But the device might not be fail-safe. Leading species might develop intersystem travel technology despite competitive attitudes or if they practice cooperation within the system and reserve competition toward the outside. They might gain the technology even if they have not removed the threat of non-leading species for other systems. Cooperative systems or aspects of them might lapse into competitive ways, competitive effects might accidentally happen, or underdeveloped systems or aspects of them might obtain alien technology without having reached the maturity to apply it wisely. Systems expanding under such conditions threaten to carry their destructive potential and cause control problems and devastation far beyond their original boundaries. Because of these perils, graduated cooperative systems may retain and coordinate defensive competitive capabilities. They may seek to quarantine immature systems to prevent them from spreading their threats. They may watch and wait until dangerous species in these systems eliminate themselves or graduate from their destructive dispositions. Graduated species may also endeavor to reorganize dispositions of species in other systems to where these become less malignant and possibly constructive elements in the advancement of nature. However, if such revisions do not succeed or do not pose a viable option, and if dangerous systems threaten to infringe on other systems, graduated species may resort to their elimination. They may resort to particularized eliminations if the threat does not emanate from all aspects of a system. To the extent threats arise because of the spread of incompatible species through leading species, including the spread of such species of themselves, attention may be limited to such leading species. Where dangerous systems are monitored or influenced, mature civilizations are likely to avoid involvement with such systems beyond necessary tasks. Such systems are not suitable candidates for relationships because they remain prone to competitive and possibly destructive behavior. In addition, higher developed aliens may refrain from contact to avoid upsetting the constructive development of systems, including the sorting out among species through competition that may remain essential at lower stages of development. Moreover, they may abstain because an awareness or even suspicion by developing leading species of superior forces might disrupt their progress. A notion of past, present, or future potential or actual interference with their system, position, or dispositions may prevent such species from taking responsibility for themselves or their system. It may induce fear and a lack of self-confidence by raising ideas of being watched and controlled. It may also induce a lack of self-reliance and initiative because developing species would hope to be assisted or saved. Aliens may initiate systems of life or species and intervene in systems to shape, support, and protect the progress of life and the development of self-aware and ultimately cooperative life forms. Yet, to curb damage and promote success, their work would have to be restricted to conditions where subjects are unaware because operations can remain clandestine, their memory could lapse or be shrouded in myth, or their knowledge could be erased. Humanity has steadfastly fulfilled all of the criteria that militate against contact by graduated aliens. It would therefore not be surprising that humanity would be isolated if properly guided representatives from other systems with graduated leading species were able to contact our system. That avoidance of contact is likely to not only pertain to more obviously physical contact. It may include all forms of interaction, including presentation and communication, because they carry many of the risks that are attached to physical contact or may lead to unwanted contact. Humanity might eventually be able to join an association of graduated civilizations. However, before these could admit us, we would have to undergo the same comprehensive cooperative transformation that we have to accomplish independently for our sake. We must become fully responsible for ourselves and our system. We have to overcome our offensive, competitive and destructive tendencies, parochial instincts, and fears that might prompt unwarranted defensive competition. We may not be able to count on alien assistance in this task. Our ability to develop past these obstacles may not only determine our acceptance into the ranks of enlightened systems. It may decide our survival, and it unquestionably determines our thriving. It may not be entirely impossible for us to imagine what our existence would be like if humanity graduated under cooperative criteria, and would be permitted to join a community of advanced systems. We can understand the motivations that would form the foundations for such a cooperation, because they would be the same that we apply in our most sincere relationships of mutuality, empathy, and pursuit of our need for collective survival and thriving. Still, it might be difficult to imagine optimized relations among mature systems at our relatively primitive stage, what subjects they encompass, and how they might be best managed. Systems might find reasons to coordinate with one another similar to how individuals or societies would engage in cooperation. They might find topics in which exchanges or joint undertakings are beneficial. They might organize in similar ways as individuals or groups would in a cooperative commonwealth to manage their coexistence. But such species might have progressed sufficiently to make contact with other systems generally unnecessary. That may be so not only because they could not offer one another resources that the other does not already have or is capable of obtaining on its own. It may also be due to the fact that systems progressively resemble one another as they develop, because they progressively assimilate the same potentials of nature. Arguably, this should cause them to eventually merge. Nevertheless, they might treasure and keep their autonomy. Even if interaction could produce advantages, the disadvantages flowing from remaining differences or organizational problems might exceed the benefits. Governing species of mature systems might therefore keep these largely or totally separate even if interchange with other systems could be conducted without competitive risk. Development may then result in separation that is only broken for defensive and coordination purposes. As more leading species graduate, defensive cooperation among them may decrease, although it may not cease as long as immature systems remain, are created, or might rise from reversion. While the mission of nature might demand their continued cooperation, it might be manageable separately with only a coordination of coverage. By increasingly caring for other humans, life, and other aspects of nature in our system, we appear to have begun to reach for a generally reconciled grade in our development. To graduate to that level, it appears to be obligatory that we devote our care to ourselves, one another, our system, other systems of life, and the progress of nature beyond. This development seems to be hindered by the fact that we lack understanding of the entirety of nature's mission. We can only discern by the tendencies we observe that we appear to be part of an evolving comprehensive development of nature into self-awareness and resulting technological and organizational capabilities on which we can only speculate. Even if the destination of nature's development may be currently obscured, we understand that human fate is entwined with that development. This appears to require that we align ourselves with nature's development and possibly influence or control it according to our comprehension and capabilities. Our emerging awareness of the mission of nature and of our position and function in it appears to be accompanied by our developing emotional attachment to that mission through growing emotional attachment to our environment. This development offers considerable potential for the increase and maximization of our happiness by developing and maximizing nature's potential. Recognizing, identifying with, and possibly defining nature's mission may occupy us and grant us sufficient satisfaction to persistently outwit our destructive impulses upon frustration. Support for nature's development may then ultimately constitute the most promising path toward securing our survival, thriving, and thus our happiness. Nevertheless, we cannot help noticing that our focus is shifting from us and our kind to a more altruistic function. Although we may deem it to be in our best interest and may increasingly identify with it by a seemingly principal need, our function and the scheme in which we exercise it may confound us. We may ask what works through or in nature to put us in this position and why nature's progression is organized this way. Because our happiness and existence appear to be tied to fulfilling our part, we may wonder what choice we have other than to conform with nature's plan. We may recognize that this plan remains nature's even if we purport to modify it. As a part and a result of nature, we cannot detach ourselves. Nature acts through us. We may thus question how much freedom we have. The next chapter examines this issue.